there, welcome back to the Energy MD podcast. So, on this episode, we're going to switch things up a little bit, and I'm going to be interviewed so you can hear about my 4-step process and all the latest updates that are happening in our program and what our current offerings are because we've made a bunch of changes. This interview was done by Andrea Nicholson on the Holistic Health Bites podcast. So, many thanks to her. Go check her out as well. We'll put the link below. All right, let's jump in.
Welcome back to the Holistic Health Bites podcast. Today, we are going to talk about all things fatigue with industry expert Dr. Evan Hirsch, who is going to share all about things with fatigue and kind of underlying causes and probably some toxicity. And we're going to talk about all kinds of things. But Dr. Evan is a medical doctor, as well as a speaker, author, just all the things, and knows so much. So I'm honored to have you here. Thank you for joining.
Andrea, thanks so much for having me on. You can call me Evan.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And will you just kind of tell everybody a little bit about you? I know I just hit the highlights, but tell everybody a little bit about you and how you got to where you are.
Sure. So my journey really started when I started my residency program out here in Olympia, Washington, and I met my wife and we fell in love, and then 6 months later she couldn't get out of bed. And that lasted for about 3 years, and then she was about 80% better. And then we got married and had a kid, and I started my own practice. And then a couple years after that, I got chronic fatigue. And it lasted for about 5 years and just about destroyed everything, just about destroyed my relationship with her. I couldn't be a good dad to our new child. In my business was suffering significantly. I was napping under my desk every single day. I had lots of shame around that because I was practicing functional medicine at that point in time. And finally, I realized that, and I knew from my functional training, if I could find all of the causes, that I would be successful. But I was so burnt out and I had so much fatigue that it was really hard for me to think my way through it. But I went on this journey of finding all the causes that I had. And I fixed all of them, and I got over it, and I wrote a book about it, and now that's my mission in life. And then because of everything that happened with COVID and long COVID now, which is really just an extension of chronic fatigue, we've incorporated that as well. And so now we're specializing in chronic fatigue and long COVID.
Oh, such a powerful story. And, I think a lot of us get into this because of our own story. So that doesn't surprise me really that you have your own story. Sometimes it's our own personal story. Sometimes it's someone in our family, and you happen to have both. So I think that definitely gives you a unique perspective, having gone through it yourself, and you understand what your patients are then dealing with. So can we just kind of start at the beginning? I know most people, there's the common complaint nowadays that people are just tired, and we're tired all the time. And it doesn't seem like we can get out of that. But there's a difference between just being tired and actually true chronic fatigue. So can we talk about really what the differences are and how you might know if chronic fatigue is really your situation?
Yeah, and it is really subjective. And so, the simple definition is tiredness that's not relieved by rest. So it's kind of like when we were in our 20s and you had your final exams and you studied all week and then partied on the weekend or whatever it was, you would come home and then you'd sleep for several weeks, maybe a month, right? And then you'd get back to baseline. This is kind of like where when you try to catch up like that and you're trying to get more sleep and you're working on all the lifestyle habit stuff that you know to do, or that you're working with a naturopath or a nutritionist or whatever, and you're still not getting better. So that's really when your body is telling you that there's a problem. If you're surviving on energy drinks, if you have to nap through the day, you're yawning throughout the day, that's definitely a problem and needs to be addressed, because it means that there's toxins that we'll talk about in a little bit that are kind of building up in the body that are having consequences on your hormones and your mitochondria and your nutrients and all of these other things. And consequently, when things start to go and you start to get fatigue and you start to have this chronic tiredness, consequently, this means that other things and inflammation and potentially diseases of longevity like heart attacks, heart disease, stroke, Alzheimer's, cancer, those are all potentially going to happen as well. So we have to pay attention when the body starts telling us that there's a problem.
Okay. Yeah. And you've talked a little bit about, toxins being one of the main things, but what are some of the other contributing factors that might lead someone to developing this chronic fatigue?
Yeah, so there's really two categories that I look at when we're looking at all these different causes. And there's deficiencies. These are things that are not present in the body and in your life that are supposed to be. And these are things that Well, and then there's toxicities, which are things that are in your body that aren't supposed to be there. So, in terms of the deficiencies, these are things people are most familiar with. So, there's the lifestyle habit component, which is like not enough good food, not enough good water, not enough good movement, not enough good sleep. And then there's the supplements that most people take. So maybe it's vitamins and minerals that have become deficient. Maybe there's hormone supplements that are being replaced, or hormone deficiencies that are being replaced, where it's adrenals, thyroid, sex hormones, or maybe it's mitochondrial function, which makes like 70 to 90% of our energy and is found in every cell in the body except for red blood cells. So those are like the deficiencies. And when you replace them, you're going to feel good or a little bit better typically with the people that I work with, but then you plateau and you're really not getting to where you want to go, because the reason why people have those deficiencies for the most part, besides the lifestyle habits, is because they have toxins that have built up in their body over time. So these are, I call the toxic five, and these are heavy metals, chemicals, molds, infections, and trauma. So those are the toxic five that have kind of built up in your life since the moment you came out of the womb. And consequently, that ends up causing a number of these deficiencies. And that's really the real root cause. It's not like an adrenal fatigue or like Hashimoto's or thyroid. Yes, that's true that you have those things and those hormones are lower. But the reason why those hormones are lower is because of the toxic five. And if you really want to get complete resolution, you got to make sure that you're focused on those.
Okay. And those all sound like they're not super easy to get rid of. It's not like you just throw your plastic water bottle away and all things are fixed. That these are things that are around us all the time and that are kind of hard to get rid of. So is that what makes chronic fatigue so difficult to not only identify, but also to resolve?
That's definitely part of it. Yes. And so there's this, everybody's got different causes. I mean, that's part of it as well. And, and oftentimes there's a combination of causes. When we're looking at so many different causes, usually everybody that I see has a combination of about 20 causes or so. When I had my chronic fatigue, I had 30 of the 36 or 38 causes that we're now looking at. So that can feel overwhelming, but the reality is that when you start down a process and you're fixing each cause as you go, and you're removing the toxins that are in your environment, and then also the toxins that are in your body, you eventually get there, right? And as humans, we overestimate the amount of time it takes to get something done in a day, and we underestimate the amount we can achieve in a year. And so I have to coach a lot of people on like this expectation that to get rid of these toxins out of your body takes a while, but they've been accumulating over the last how many decades, right? But at the end of that year, it's kind of like doing a master's. Like at the end of that year, you turn around and you're like, oh my gosh, I accomplished so much, and now I've got the rest of my life to look forward to.
Yeah, I love it. And, that's the same thing with anything in health. We want results overnight, but it took probably decades to get to where you are right now. So of course it's not going to turn around overnight. It generally doesn't take decades to undo, but it's not going to happen overnight. So I think setting expectations up front is always important to do. So I know that you just mentioned that there's like 38 different underlying causes and things that can contribute to these things, but you've kind of boiled it down to a simple process that you take your clients through, right? Can you kind of walk us through what that process is?
Mm-hmm. So I have a 4-step process that I call the Energy MD method that I've been working on for the last decade. And the first step is to figure out which causes you have. Now, of those causes that we just mentioned, 90% of those can be determined by history and symptoms. So that means that 10% require labs. It's like $500 for the labs that I recommend, which kind of blows people's minds, because generally when they go to see a functional medicine doctor, I've heard of up to $7,000 is the amount that that doctors and practitioners will run labs initially, like before they even see you or anything like that, which I think is ridiculous. But part of it is also that with my clientele, the people that I see, everybody who has chronic fatigue and gets to that point of their energy being, a 5 out of 10 or a 4 out of 10 or less than that, where they're really not as functional as they want to be, they have all of the toxic five. So I used to test for all of those, and every 3 months we would do testing. But inevitably over the course of a year, all of those toxins would come out, the heavy metals, the chemicals, the molds, the infections, and every kind of infection, viruses, bacteria, spirochetes, like all of this sort of stuff. So then I realized, okay, I can save people a ton of money. And instead of using that for testing, we can actually just be treating those things. And so everybody has different causes, but everybody has the toxic 5. So that's kind of like what I've learned. So that's the 90%. So that's the good news about figuring out your causes. And then we also have, depending on which program people join in our system, you're going to know your causes in like about 1 or 2 hours, whether you're filling it out in our workbook and course or whether we're doing it on a one-on-one. So you start off knowing the causes that you have, and then the rest of the process is kind of matching up a treatment that works with the causes you have. So then the second step is to replace the deficiencies. And so that's kind of like we talked about with the adrenals and the thyroid and the mitochondria. I call those the big 3 because they give you the biggest uptick in your energy. And they're really important, even though this process is all about removing the toxins, it's really important to become more resilient. And so that's kind of what we're doing with replacing the deficiencies, making sure the lifestyle habits are in order, making sure that these deficiencies have been replaced so that you actually have an uptick in your energy, you have more resilience, it's easier for you to manage the stress in your life and to function in your life. Because when we start removing these toxins in step 4, it actually is stressful on the body, and you need to have that support in step 2. So then in step 3, we're opening up the drainage pathways or the detox pathways. These are like the exit pathways in your body: the liver, the kidney, the lymph, which is the garbage system in the body, the neurolymph, which is in the brain, the intestines, the gallbladder. Those are all ways that we get toxins and things out of our body. And when you have chronic fatigue, they're all clogged. So we have to open them up. It's kind of like a funnel where it's really compressed at the bottom, and we kind of have to open it up so that toxins can flow out. And then we get into step 4, where it's about removing the toxins. And each of those steps takes about a month, except for step 4, which is going to take you 9 to 24 months, depending on the number of causes you have and the severity of each of those causes.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds really comprehensive and yet doable. I mean, something that people can really go through, and it's actionable, and it's not only going to fix just the fatigue, but it sounds like it's going to fix a lot of other things along the way as well, and just kind of rebalance the body to be optimal in all the ways, which is obviously ideal. If you can, take out all the problems at once, that's awesome. So tell us a little bit about, like, what are some things people are doing on a daily basis that are maybe contributing to this toxic load? What are some mistakes people are making, whether they know it or they kind of know it and they're ignoring it?
So let's go through our day, right? Or an example of a day. So you wake up in the morning. So, how close is your phone to your head? Has your phone been left on all night? Are you sleeping near a smart meter, or what other things are plugged in where you're having exposure to electromagnetic frequencies, electromagnetic fields that are interfering with your DNA, causing DNA damage and increasing inflammation? And then oftentimes the first thing that people do is that, and interfering with your sleep potentially, first thing that people do is they wake up and they check their phones, right? And so if you go on social media, you're basically looking at other people's ideal lives, right? Posting on Facebook or whatever. And so that puts us into comparison. There's a quote that my wife likes to quote all the time, which is, "Comparison is the thief of happiness." I don't know who said it, but it's a really good quote. And so if you start off your day in comparison, all of a sudden you're not as happy as potentially you could be, right? And then if you check your email, what's in your email? It's people who are requesting things from you, right? So all of a sudden now you feel an urgency to kind of like get back to people, right? So what we coach people on is to start a mindset practice. And so we teach them what I call a daily mindset practice, which is 4 steps. And it's about gratitude and envisioning your ideal day and flipping any negative beliefs into empowering beliefs and asking ourselves empowering questions. And so that can really start to set your day for success as opposed to some of these other things. And then so you get up in the morning and like, what choices are you making in terms of water consumption? So you want water that's filtered. If you go to ewg.org/tapwater, TAPWATER, that's the Environmental Working Group, you can put in your zip code and they will tell you all of the toxins that you have in your tap water. So we think that our municipalities are such a great service by filtering out our water, and they are to some extent, but in general, it's pretty awful. And so you're still being toxified by your water. So having a good carbon filtration system, I have all this on my recommended page on our website of the different brands that I recommend, or even a distiller to the next degree, can be really helpful at making sure that that you're consuming water that's really healthy for you. And then you also should be really consuming, most people, close to 3 liters of water a day, especially when you're doing like a program like ours where we're getting rid of toxins out of the body. The adage is that you want like half your body weight in ounces. And so if you weigh like 150 pounds, you should be consuming 70 ounces or 2 liters of water. Somewhere between 2 and 3 liters really is ideal. And you want to start your day off with that. Consuming as much water as you can initially is really good for kind of like flushing things out. And then moving on to food, making good food choices. Oftentimes it's more about what you're not eating, as you know, is much better than, it decreases the inflammation so that you can feel better in your life. And so I tell people, protein and vegetables is really ideal at every meal, maybe a little bit of fruit, and vegetables should be like half of your plate. At every meal, try to have maybe dinner for breakfast or lunch for breakfast. Oftentimes our breakfast foods aren't really that great. And protein can be meat, as long as it's grass-fed and hopefully grass-finished, or it can be some sort of vegetarian meat as well, beans or whatever. So making good food choices is important. So you've got your water and your food choices, and then kind of going throughout your day, working on your mindset, and then getting some exercise at some point during the day, making sure you're getting movement. I tell a lot of people that if you don't have a lot of time and you don't want to do something that is considered quote unquote exercise, then putting on your favorite song and dancing to it. We actually had a dance party last night, my daughter and I, and that was super fun. And it's just a great way to get some exercise in throughout the day. And then a lot of people are going to work at that point. And whether you're working at home or whether you're working outside, there's some stats to show that about 500 women are exposed to about 550 different chemicals before they even leave the house in the morning, from all of the crap that you're kind of putting on your body. So cosmetics and soaps and this, that, and the other thing. So making choices, and this doesn't happen overnight. Basically you create a plan for, every month or so, you're going to examine a different part of your cabinetry, what's in your pantry, or what's in your closets or whatever, to determine, okay, what do I have that's toxic that I can kind of swap out for something that's a bit healthier. So trying to decrease these 89, 90,000 different chemicals that we're exposed to on a regular basis that haven't been appropriately evaluated by government bodies or scientific organizations that are supposed to be managing our health, right? So then you get into a car. If you're I'm just going here. You can interrupt me at any point. Is
You're
this
good.
all
You're
right? This
good.
is
Keep
good.
going.
So you get into your car and you're driving to work, and if you don't have your car on recycling, you're not recycling your air, then you're breathing in gas fumes from other people, and these show up on a number of these tests that we run. If you've got new car smell, then you're getting exposed to some of the what is it? Not boron. It's there's some chemicals that are in that as well, and some heavy metals. If you have mercury fillings in your mouth, the silver fillings, every time you bite down, you're absorbing mercury vapor. If you have sushi or fish or any sort of seafood at work, unfortunately, like 95% of all the seafood we're consuming at this point in time has mercury in it. And so you're going to be increasing the mercury in your body. If you're smoking or you're exposed to smoke, you're getting cadmium, which is another heavy metal. If you're working in a place that was built before 1972 or whatever, there's going to be potentially lead paint in the dust in the space at home, and then also potentially at work. If you've ever had any sort of water damage in the space, there can be mold that you're being exposed to. So these toxins just build up in your body over time until your body kind of calls it quits. The last thing that I'll say is, coming out of the womb, we now know that we're exposed to over 300 different chemicals that are found in babies' cord blood. So this is from moms dumping all their good stuff and not so good stuff into babies. And so you just have to understand that we're like coming out of the womb behind the 8 ball. right? And with all these toxins, and then they end up accumulating throughout our lives, and then it becomes too much. Oh, and the last thing I'll say, in terms of infections, is that when you have heavy metals, chemicals, and molds in your body, they distract the immune system, and consequently, that allows infections to become opportunistic. And so we have this relationship with infections in our body, but oftentimes it's in balance until it's no longer in balance by any sort of really significant stressor or these toxins, and then these infections come out, or you get the jab, or you get COVID, or stuff like that that end up contributing and increasing inflammation in the body. So that's kind of big picture, a lot of the exposures that we get throughout the day and throughout our lives.
Yeah, and there really are so many places that we're getting these exposures from, both from things we're actively choosing, like our personal care products and home care products, and also things that we don't really choose, like what's in our air and what's in our water and those kinds of things. So obviously we have to take extra precaution around those things because we can't really stop them. So we just have to do what we can to filter them out. But I hear from my clients all the time that this just seems impossible.
Right.
They're coming at us from everywhere. Toxins are in everything. Where do people start if they're like, seriously, everything around me is toxic? Why even bother?
Yeah, and so that's part of the mindset practice, and asking yourself a better question, right? So it's like the question of, there's no way to do this, or it's overwhelming, or I guess that's more of a statement. But the reality is that all you got to do is one thing. These are like, it's all about baby steps. So, it's like once a month or once a year, if you do one thing, like this year, it'll be like, let's get a whole house water filter. Let's research that. Let's figure that out. Let's do that. And then you're good for the next 50 years. You know what I mean? And let's do, and then the next year, it's like, let's look at our personal care products. So you can obviously make more faster decisions than that, but it can happen over the course of several years, and you're going to be very successful when you do that. So it's all about, yes, I totally understand that this is all overwhelming, but you have to work with a practitioner, other people out there who can kind of like hold your hand and kind of like walk you through this process. And it becomes a lot easier, when somebody's kind of doing that for you. But if you want to do it on your own, great. And just kind of set these milestones, put alarms on your calendar, be like, once a month on a Saturday, it'll be like, examine personal care products, or go to that list that, Evan was talking about, or whatever, that or you go to ChatGPT and you ask, tell me all the ways that I'm being exposed to toxins in my life right now, and then give me some solutions. And so then you can start like working through that checklist.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to look at it. And I love the baby step concepts. I always tell my clients to, like, when you run out of something, just before you replace it, find a better alternative. If your dish soap you need a new bottle, get a better quality one. Get one that's less toxic. Same thing with your shampoo. Same thing with makeup. Whatever that looks like. Just as you have to replace stuff, just find a better option. And so every little bit helps. It does feel overwhelming, and it does seem like there's toxins and things bombarding us all day, every day. And that's true. But every little step we take is helping you. And so, every baby step you can take is a good thing. So I wanted to go back to a lot of people live in really old homes or work in really old buildings. So if you live in a house that was, say, built in the 50s, that probably has potentially several decades of water leaks over the years, probably lead paint and, just all the things, what would you recommend to someone who lives or works in one of those environments? Does it require a mitigation company? Do you just have to like plow your house under and start over? What do you do if you live in that kind of environment?
Yeah, we have a 1924 home that is having its 100th year anniversary this year. And so we know this very well. And it's definitely a process, but the first step is to test. And so in the two tests that I really recommend when it comes to chronic fatigue is, one, to make sure that you're not living in mold, or if you are, to figure out what to do about it. And then two is like some blood tests that we're looking at. But the mold one is really huge. So it's doing a test. I like the EMA test, which is environment, mold, and mycotoxin assessment. And so this is looking at the spores, but it's also looking at the mycotoxins, which are the toxins produced by the molds. So it's really the best test that's out there. It's about $320 on our website. And that's the first step, is to determine whether that's the case. Because the challenge is that, you may have mold in your body, but you may not have mold in your home, or you may have mold in your home, but if it's in your home and you've been there for at least 6 months, then it's going to be in your body, right? But you may have had mold exposure when you were 5 years old, and you lived in a place for a couple of years, and you may have had no mold exposure since, which is rare, but it's possible. And you may be 50, 60 years old, and you still have that mold from when you were 5. Okay, so it just stays in the body. And so it does build up, and it does bloom at different times of year and stuff like that. So you may feel worse, but it's to determine whether or not you're living in it, right? So doing an assessment like that, if you do just have access to mold plates, you can put out the mold plates, stick them in a closet for 5 days, see what it grows out. Generally, you have to send it into a lab, though, to get it assessed and determine what are these different mold strains. But, it's, once again, it's baby steps. It's one step at a time, and getting that assessment is crucial. The other thing I just want to comment on that is that you don't have to be in an old home. So, that's kind of, I get that you said that, because that's what most people think. But if you're driving around town and it's raining, are there still homes that are being built? Absolutely, right? And so you see these homes that are wooden structures, and it's raining, and then the first sunny day, the workers are back and they're sealing it up, and new homes are sealed up really tight. So if you want to grow mold, you get something wet, and then you add heat to it and warmth, right? And you seal it up, right? So that is something to be concerned about as well, because I've definitely seen people who have new homes who also have mold. So it's an important assessment whenever you feel tired. And if you can associate feeling tired with a new job that you had to go to, or a new house that you moved into, that can definitely be significant in your health journey.
Yeah. And the new home, I love that you mentioned that. I actually live in a new home, and it is incredibly airtight, that all the things that are off-gassing, all the brand new carpets and new cabinets and new paint and all the things are also trapped in your house. So it's not just about mold, but all these other toxins that just come with our lives today. And so it's important to open windows and get air filters and water filters and all the things that we've talked about. So I think that was a great point to make, that it's not just about old homes or old buildings that you might work in, but it really can be even in new environments with mold that got trapped when they were building it, or even new homes still have water leaks. Like, it doesn't take decades to build up these things. So,
well, and that's the joke when, people, I live in the Pacific Northwest, and so people are like, oh, and if they live up here, they're like, oh, I'm just going to move to the Southwest. I'm going to move to Arizona. And the joke is, are you going to have indoor plumbing?
Right.
Does it still rain there?
Yep.
Right. It's an issue no matter where you live.
Yeah. Yeah. I live in Colorado, and we often hear, oh, it's an arid climate. Mold only grows in humid environments. And people just completely dismiss it. And that's totally not true. Not all mold has to live in a musty, wet environment. It just takes a little bit of water to get it started.
Right.
But it doesn't necessarily require a lot of water to kind of keep going.
Right.
So let's talk just briefly about the long COVID side of things, because that's still fresh on a lot of people's minds. And yet I don't think people really understand what that is. What signs would you look for? Who's susceptible? And of course, what do you do about it?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. So if you had COVID, and even if it was really mild symptoms, actually this happens more when you have 5 mild symptoms than it does if you have major symptoms. And so we can talk about why that happens in a minute. But if you get some sort of viral illness since 2019, and after that, you end up with some new symptoms or weird symptoms. And COVID can cause over 250 different symptoms. So it can be everything from fatigue to brain fog to sweating to muscle pain to loss of sense of smell and taste, stuff like that, headaches. Then you have to consider COVID. Or if it happened after you got the jab, right? So you have to kind of consider these things. And so the people who are most susceptible actually already have the toxic 5 in their body. So the COVID becomes the straw that breaks the camel's back. Okay, so you already had heavy metals, chemicals, molds, infections, and trauma in your body, and it wasn't an issue until you get the COVID. And what ends up happening really is that those toxins are distracting the immune systems often left field, and then the COVID comes into the body and is like, there's no immune system around here to take care of me. So it's actually better to have a really strong reaction, like you're like, oh man, worst flu of my life, because your immune system's actually doing something to get rid of this spike protein out of the body. And if it doesn't, then the COVID can come in and be like, oh, I'm just going to do what I want to do in the body and go into every compartment and start causing a bunch of inflammation and take over the production of this and that and the other thing in the cells. And so that's why it ends up taking hold. And oftentimes it also takes more hold when people try to go back to exercise sooner rather than later. So if you think you got over, you're like, I had a mild case, and then you're training for a marathon and you go for a 10-mile run, and then you're laid out. Oftentimes that's because the COVID has gotten into the mitochondria. The mitochondria produces energy, and you're just kind of like fostering this environment for the COVID to be able to grow. One other thing that's important to note is that sometimes you get COVID and then your symptoms persist. Sometimes you get COVID and you feel like you're fine and your symptoms go away. And then a month later, 2 months, I've even seen like 6 months later, all of a sudden weird symptoms start popping up. So you do have to kind of keep it in mind. It needs to be on everybody's differential right now since 2019, unfortunately.
Okay. And those weird symptoms, is that just fatigue related, or what other kinds of things should people be watching for?
Yeah, so it can be fatigue, it can be like sweating, it can be brain fog, it can be muscle pain, it can be loss of smell and taste, it can be sleep issues. That can be a major one. And the stats are like 20% of everybody who gets COVID or who's gotten COVID ends up progressing with some sort of persistent symptom. Um, there's a significant uptick in memory issues. There's significant uptick in cancer since 2019. So these are all things that most likely COVID is contributing to, or the spike proteins contributing to.
Okay. And if someone's thinking as they're listening to this list of things and they know they had COVID or the vaccine or whatever, do they go through the same kind of protocol as the chronic fatigue stuff that you've already talked about, or is it different when it comes from COVID being the trigger?
It's very similar. So because there's the toxic five that are still present, and we're still figuring out the causes, replacing the deficiencies, opening the drainage pathways, and then removing the toxins. The only thing is that we do add on more of an emphasis on hypercoagulation, which is removing the microclots, which we do for chronic fatiguers anyway, but we just do oftentimes a little bit more of that. Sometimes there's some different components of clotting that we end up using, or different treatments that we do specific for removing the spike protein out of the body. So might be some different herbs or some different nutrients in order to inhibit the spike protein's function in the cells and inhibit its attachment onto the cells in order to be able to get it out of the body.
Okay. Yeah. Good to know that it's similar, but a little bit different. So if you know you might have this problem, that's a good thing to really hone in on and make sure that you mention, if you're going to go work with a practitioner, that you think it might be related to long COVID, because protocol is a little bit different. Right. Thank you so much for sharing all of this amazing information. If people are interested in learning about you and your work and all the things that you can share with them, what is the best way?
So I'm at energymdmethod.com. And we're 100% virtual now, so we work with people all over the world. On our website, you can actually text me directly. There's a little text bubble in the bottom right corner, and we can have a conversation. We have initial visits. We have a starter program of 3 months, so you can kind of get to know whether or not you like us. And then you can join one of our longer 12-month programs to get to the resolution of everything. And then if you're not sure or you just want to have a conversation, I've got free 20-minute calls right now that are available.
I love it. And of course, you have your book. So if people want to get to know some of the stuff that way as well, talk a little bit about your book.
Yeah, so that's on Amazon. It's called Fix Your Fatigue, and it goes through the 4-step process. It is from 2017, so it's 7 years old at this point in time, but a lot of the tenets are still the same. The protocols are different. It doesn't talk about COVID at all, obviously, but it can definitely be a good starter to see if we're a good fit.
Love it. Love it. Thank you so much for sharing all of this amazing info. We will link up all your stuff in the show notes. So it'll be really easy for people to just click over and find you easily. So thank you again so much. This was amazing. I learned a ton, and I'm sure everybody else did as well.
Thanks so much for having me on. So if you have chronic fatigue, long COVID, or mast cell activation syndrome, and you're looking for help, check us out at energymdmethod.com. We have a program for almost every single budget, and we're here to help. I hope you learned something on today's podcast. If you did, please share it with your friends and family and leave us a 5-star review on iTunes. It's really helpful for getting this information out to more people who desperately need it. Sharing all the experts I know and love and the powerful tips I have is one of my absolute favorite things to do. Thanks for being part of my community. Just a reminder, this podcast is for educational purposes only and is not a substitute for professional care by a doctor or other qualified medical professional. It is provided with the understanding that it does not constitute medical or other professional advice or services. Thanks for listening, and have an amazing day.